Hello and welcome to NJ Biz Conversations. I'm your host, Jeff Kanige. My guest today is Karen Kessler. She is the founder and CEO of Kessler PR Group. Karen, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks for taking the time to join me. I appreciate it. Now, you and your firm are famously or notoriously, depending on your perspective, reluctant to talk about your clients. So we're going to stay away from that. However, I think that you do have something that you can help business owners and executive with, and that is some information about two of your specialties: reputation management and crisis communications. So I'd like to start with reputation management, which I'm guessing has become significantly more difficult as social media has sort of grown and then in some cases broken down. Is that the case, or how has your job changed over the past say 2 or 3 years?
Our job changes but almost month to month based on what's
Okay.
going on in this world and the kinds of issues that are going on in this world. And I think reputation management is one of those issues that people don't spend a lot of time thinking about unless you're one of those companies where the SEC requires you to think about it. Until all of a sudden something occurs to you or one of your competitors and you say, oh my God, we're not ready for this. And we have seen that over and over again. And while the issues may change based on what's going on in the news cycle, the basic tenets of reputation management don't change, which is it's very important to have thought about these things in advance. It's very important to have a plan in place for some of the kinds of issues that you might need to address. And it's very important to know who you're going to call when you're going to have problems, regardless of the kinds of issues those are, whether that's the right lawyer, whether that's the right accountant, whether that's the right forensic firm, whether that's the right reputation management firm.
Okay, well, that's what I was curious about. What should be the first call? If a company feels as though it's or a company man, let's start with just an individual, a CEO, for example, sees something online that is negative about him or her, and wants to do something about it. It's false. They want to do something about it. What's the first thing they need to do?
Well, one of the things we need to do is determine who that is coming from and how serious a threat that is. A lot of these can be dismissed. They're coming from disgruntled former employees. It gets no traction. If you start to amplify it, you are creating an issue for yourself. If you start sharing it, we always say to our clients, don't click the link, embed the story if you're going to share it with someone and say, should I be concerned? The minute you start clicking, the more you're giving the clickbait, which of course makes the story become with a more popular story. So the first thing is to determine how real and serious a threat it is. The second thing, though, is to have a plan in place. In some cases, depending on the kinds of attack it is, a lawyer is the right call. In many cases, a lawyer is really limited to what they can do.
Mhm.
In the olden days, that means 6 months ago, on Twitter and on Instagram, there used to be people that we could call and say, we have an issue. This is defamatory. This is not real. And they would address it right away. With all the cutbacks on most of these social media channels, it's very hard to get that done. And so
Right.
you really have to rely on other techniques to try to address these things.
Okay. And I mean, I think everybody's heard some of the advertisements on TV and radio for firms that promise to be able to do this. Should that be one of the calls you make to one of those firms, or should it be to someone like you?
So I guess we're all in this universe together, and I don't really want to do a number on anyone, but I
Okay.
would say firms that specialize in just spewing out a whole lot of what they would consider positive news, putting your name out there on websites that no one's ever heard of in ways in which they really don't speak to the kind of brand you are trying to change the algorithms of these social media channels. But in
Okay.
the end, one story on a legit news source like an NJ Biz or a New York Times or a CBS News or anything like that will dwarf those efforts in 2 seconds.
Okay.
So I would say to people, be cautious how you spend your money if you're trying to address something. And I would look to see if anyone's had the kind of track record that you think you want before you immediately invest in one of those services.
Okay. But what I thought I heard you saying also is that folks shouldn't try to do this themselves. Am I right? I mean, because I think a lot of folks' reaction is they see something online, they immediately want to go try and deny it or respond to it, react to it in some way. But that just adds fuel to the fire. I don't want to put words in your mouth. I'll just ask the question.
You're absolutely right. And the other thing that we get a lot is we get calls that say, this just went up. This is negative. I need you to flood it with positive news. Start writing great stories about us. And we say it doesn't work like that. And frankly, the more visibility you get at a certain time when there are bad stories, the more they're sure to get more attention to those bad stories. So the hardest part is being able to tell a CEO or a company, we got to lay low. We've got to not react right now. We've got to lay in wait a little bit and decide when it's time to pounce, sort of just like an animal, right? You don't always go after the first prey that's coming your way, but that's a really hard message to a lot of people. And, once seen, it's hard to get it out of your mind when it's you who's under attack.
Okay. And is it possible to undo the damage? Like if something is posted online, negative, false, that really does damage a company or an individual's reputation, is it actually possible to rehabilitate that?
Sure, but it depends on who the audience is. Are you rehabilitating
Okay.
it with your employees? Are you rehabilitating it with your customers? Are you rehabilitating it with your friends and neighbors and the people you go to church and synagogue with? Or, once we get something off the first page of a Google search, nobody really looks that much further. And frankly, a whole lot of people don't even look at that. And that's what people need to understand is, most people are not Googling people that they meet. Most people are not, if they've heard of it, they really haven't heard it accurately anyhow. So you've got to really have some sense of framework as you look at these options.
Okay. And what we've been talking about now is sort of reactive. Are there things business executives, businesses can do before something gets posted online, or before the
Without a
damage?
doubt.
Okay.
That old expression about, have money in the bank so that when there are withdrawals, you're ready. A lot of the, depending on who the organization is and what it is. First of all, having strong and solid relationships with your customers and your key contacts is important because those are the people that we call in our office third-party endorsers. Those are the ones that are either going to say, I deal with this company all the time and they're rotten and lousy and abrupt and, dismissive of their employees, whatever you're going to say. Or those are the ones that are going to say, this is impossible. I know this company. I know their track record. I know how they operate. This can't be real. Those people to a reporter are gold because they have inside information. So you want to make sure that you shore up those resources. Obviously, employees, key, because employees are the ones that can do the biggest number on you. We always say it doesn't matter what that person's role is in the company. If they're able to have a chyron under their name that says, I work there, then, and if they say something negative, then that counts as well. So shoring up all those internal relationships are important. If you're a public facing company, you should have good media relations so that reporters would think to call you before they write something. Unfortunately, these days, it's not always legit reporters. It's
Mhm.
bloggers, it's posters, it's people who call themselves citizen journalists. It's all kinds of labels that don't have to abide by the same kind of rules that you do.
Right. Well, that actually it is interesting because it leads to the next question I was going to ask, and that is the changing nature of technology, the rise of artificial intelligence, the production of deep fakes, videos that are clearly or not so clearly fake, but convey a really horrible message. Are you seeing a lot of that happen now? Is it more is AI and deep fakes, are they real serious trouble?
They are beginning to be real serious trouble. Sometimes they are really harmful, and sometimes we had a client last week and who passed away. And among the first obituaries to come out were all AI generated based on information that they pulled from the internet, some of which was right, some of which was wrong. Much of it was not what we would have prioritized when we talked about sort of looking back at the life of this person. So without a doubt, it's out there. We have had clients who have come to us when they have news and we will draft something and they will say, well, look what AI said. And when we start seeing some of the phrases that they use, like when they refer to themselves as legendary, we know that how they're feeding AI and the kinds of keywords they're giving, because in the end, AI just gives you back what you give them in terms of keywords. So, you're not going to get away with convincing the world you're legendary if in fact that you're the only one that feels that way.
Okay, so let's move on to crisis communications. I'm curious. Let's just keep it to New Jersey or this
Sure.
region.
We
What
can
are
keep it to this week, Jeff, whatever you'd
okay?
like.
We
And it's
probably
only
can.
Monday.
Right, exactly. What's the most common crisis? Does it have to do with Me Too kind of charges, sexual harassment, discrimination, things like that, or is it financial? What are businesses likely to most likely to have to deal with?
We are truly a reflection of what's going on in the greater conversation. So without a doubt, there were probably 3 years when we could have answered our phones, me too is us, can I help you? Because that was the only kind of phone calls we were getting. I'd say in the last 6 months, there have been a lot of phone calls from organizations and businesses that are wondering, do I tread into big social issues? My employees are asking what our values are. Do I have to put out there who I'm voting for? Do I have to put out there how I feel about, the Mideast? Do I have to put out there how I feel about, any other kinds of issues about Ukraine? If I do one, do I have to do all? How often do I have to do this? Who do I have to address it to? We're seeing a lot of that because a lot of them that are looking to recruit a lot of younger people that are recently out of school are asking those kinds of questions. What are the values of this company? Do they reflect how I feel? And that's really difficult waters to tread in.
Okay. Now, how would you, or is there a different approach to handling something that goes to that sort of thing, the values of a company, as opposed to something that goes to the company's conduct, say financial irregularity or something like that? Is there a difference in approach between different kinds of problems that they run into?
Sure, every problem is a different
Okay.
approach, and every issue is a different approach. If you're a regulated business, no doubt you're going to bump up against a regulator at some time. You don't get the kind of response you get. You get a poor review of bank. You're out of business. You get suspended. Those are huge kinds of issues that we deal with on a regular basis. If you are, anyone who has a large staff, there's employment issues without a doubt. Every kind of protected class has issues. Every kinds of issues come up, whether it's everything from how much PTO you're giving to, and is that reflective to your maternity and paternity policies, to your policies about pronouns, to your policies about everything and anything. I mean, those discriminatory cases go on day in and day out. All the Me Too's, it still is amazing to us after all this education and all this visibility that people are still sticking their hands where they don't belong. And indeed, it happens all the time. And when we go back and we say to the person who's being accused, what were you thinking? The answer generally is always the same to us, which is 99% of the time we hear this. It was consensual.
Right.
And we have to say, when you are the one who signs the paycheck, or when you are the one that writes the review, that is not consensual.
Right.
And we get a blank stare every time. We get a blank stare.
Okay. Now, how high up in an organization do you go where an individual's actions really sort of call into question the reputation of the entire organization? Is it the CEO only? I mean, or can it be just a sort of a regular rank and file employee? I'm just thinking because, as you say, this week, if you were, say, the president of an Ivy League university and you got in trouble for something you did or didn't say in Congress, it seems to have, in some cases, tainted the entire institution. How often does that happen, and how high up does it go?
It happens all. First of all, it doesn't have to. Yes, the C-suite clearly. It could be the board of directors. It could be somebody who's serving in a volunteer capacity in a not-for-profit. It could be, it doesn't really matter a lot. It's really about how the organization reacts and how they choose to handle it. The person doesn't have to be the highest ranking individual, but if the way the company chooses to react doesn't seem to take it seriously, and other people within the organization are resentful or feel that you're being dismissive or whatever it is, then that's how these kinds of things create. And they're crowds, they get crowdsourcing, everybody starts talking about it, everybody starts writing about it. And then you're with a full blown, crisis. And you say, how did that happen? That person's not making decisions for the company. It doesn't matter. You made the decision how to respond to it. It's all about the response.
All right. Well, and let me ask you then about a couple of different kinds of scenarios and what the response should be. A company, a CEO, a compliance officer gets a notice of a regulatory investigation that could be serious. I mean, a regulated industry that could really call into the viability of the company. How would you approach that, for example, as opposed to, say, a law enforcement investigation, where someone is investigating crimes committed by either the company or an individual there? Is there a difference in how you go with how you approach something depending on who's doing the investigating?
Sure. First of all, there's usually a working group in most of the kinds of issues that we're involved with. And it usually involves counsel, whether it's inside or outside counsel, especially in regulatory and certainly in law enforcement kinds of things. Sometimes we're asked, who's the best person that you've worked with on this kind of matter? And we're asked to make a recommendation as to counsel. It's usually counsel. It's usually one or two people inside, whether that's the chief operating officer, the CEO, it depends on what the issue is. And the first thing is to make sure that you have access to the right information. If we, sometimes we used to say, and it's such a horrible analogy, so everyone can turn off their computer, but, we used to say it can be like a proctology exam. Sometimes these things drip out slowly. That is the worst. You want to know that you have access to the right information before you make a statement. You don't want to go out early and say, absolutely, the regulators were wrong, only to find out that somebody fudged the numbers or whatever went on. So getting access to the right information, and that's part of getting the right people in the room. On the other hand, if there's too many people in the room, everybody starts being an apologist, and then that's a different kind of issue. And then you find that you don't have the information and everybody's trying to cover their own rears, and that creates issues that will last far longer. In some cases, we've had CEOs say, I don't want to involve too many people from the C-suite. I don't want this to be something that everyone's chatting about. I want to work only with outside consultants. That works for us as well, as long as we can get the right information.
Okay. And I was asking that question because I'm curious whether in this kind of instance, a company, an executive of the company may feel or may be under an actual obligation to respond in some way fairly quickly.
They often are. There's often legal requirements, who you have to notify in these kinds of situations, who has to be, do you have insurance for these kinds of things? How do you have to notify and put in a claim for this? Then that makes it public. Within the staff, who do you have to tell? Absolutely. And that's why, this team approach usually is the way it works. We recommend for all of our larger institutional clients, organizations, not-for-profits, education institutions, to have some sort of written crisis communication plan that at least is a skeleton version of how to react, with at least 15 to 20 this could happen to you scenarios. We write them all the time for clients. Lots of times clients are really in a position to write them themselves, but they don't have the wherewithal to do it, or they don't think about it until it's too late, with all the right numbers of who you want to contact. Oftentimes in these situations, you have to contact law enforcement right away. And what you find is nobody knows how to do that, or no one knows who the right one is to do that. Those kinds of things are all prophylactic and all can be avoided with a plan.
Okay, so the plan sort of lays out who is going to do what and when and in what order. Is that
and what some samples are of how we might respond if this is it. They all have to be tweaked. None of these are going to be, written in cement, but at least you have some outline of how you're going to approach some of these things. I cannot tell you how many times, though, we've written them for organizations, and then when something hits the fan, we get a phone call and we want to say, that's on page 26, exactly what you're dealing with. But, the other thing is you've got to make it a living document. You can't just write it and stick it in a dusty corner and forget it.
Right. Okay. All right. So, do apologies work? I mean, if after all of this, it ends up where you feel like, we really have to say, either we screwed up or somebody screwed up on our behalf, we really should show some contrition. A, does it work? And B, how do you make it sound like it's sincere?
That's one of our favorite topics, is we call them faux apologies, which is how most people choose to apologize. And it usually starts with a preposition like this: if we offended you. Well, the minute you say that, you might as well just say, forget it. Why are you wasting the time even putting something out there? A well-crafted apology is a very challenging thing for most individuals, most corporations to be able to put together. Most people don't want to accept responsibility. Most people want to put the onus on the person that was offended. Most people want to say it was so isolated that it could never happen again. And most times those kinds of apologies only end up in, creating a swirling effect that creates far worse event than if you had said nothing. So the first thing is, it has to be authentic. And if you're not authentic, if you're not ready to really apologize, if you don't really accept responsibility, don't waste your time with something that you're only going to offend further.
Okay, so the bottom line is, in order to sound sincere, you have to be sincere. Yes.
Well, that's true. And then you have to write sincere.
Right. Okay.
You have to be it. You have to feel it. You have to write all of the above.
Okay. All right. So
and then you hope someone's going to read it. That's the last piece of it.
Right. So I'm curious as to what you see happening in the future. Is there any emerging trends, something that we haven't talked about that you're seeing that businesses should be aware of? Is something bubbling up out there that maybe hasn't burst into consciousness, but could be a problem?
I think we touched on some. I think AI is only going to grow far more significant going forward. And I think it's going to be a far greater problem for most people to deal with. I think especially places that have lots of employees. I think that all the employment related, employment law and employment related issues are hotter than ever, always. So those are going to be issues. As I said, I think social issues and how much you let that seep into the culture of a company is going to be a very big one going forward. I think that, in these regulated times, there's always those kinds of cases. And I think as the economy, until the economy really picks up in a more substantial way, people are under a lot of pressure. So I think all of those kinds of decisions, whether those are, we call those executive, we don't call them terminations, but we call those, relocations, like, when you're firing people that matter,
Right.
how you do it, the way in which you do it, the transitions for those kinds of things matter. Getting board members to serve on boards is increasingly more difficult. People understand that there's much more risk than they thought there was. So I think all of those kinds of issues are going to come down our way. That said, yes, this weekend we got 2 clients that had huge things that bubbled up over a weekend. And that's the nature of our business. It's very 24/7. I know everyone says that about everything they do, but the truth is crises don't wait from Monday through Friday. And when things happen, and whether it's physical kinds of issues, like a plant blows up, or there's that kind of stuff, or whether it's something different than that, or someone gets caught doing something, it's crazy. It can be crazy hours for a while.
Okay. Well, crazy hours, and I assume that you will be there with your clients during those crazy hours.
That's we get turned on by drama. What can I say?
Okay, that's a good place to leave it. Karen Kessler,
Okay.
CEO, Kessler PR Group. Thank you very much for taking the time to
Thank
talk.
you so much for spending the time with me, Jeff. Bye-bye.
And thank you all for watching. Until next time, stay safe, everyone.